A man who grew up stealing cars in one of Boston's toughest neighborhoods ended up becoming the most beloved figure on one of Discovery Channel's most watched reality shows. And when that show disappeared from the air without warning, millions of fans never got a straight answer about why. His name is Stan Zuray. For 5 years, he and the people of Tanana, Alaska, let cameras into their world, a world built on frozen rivers, fish wheels, sled dogs, and the kind of survival instinct most Americans have never had to develop. And then, after 7 seasons, it was over. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what killed Yukon Men, and why the real reason is more complicated and more interesting than anyone at Discovery Channel ever bothered to explain. Stan Zuray did not grow up dreaming about Alaska. He grew up in Dorchester, a working-class neighborhood in Boston, Massachusetts, where money was always short and his father worked multiple shifts just to keep the family housed and fed. That constant absence left a mark. Stan watched his dad grind through jobs he hated, come home exhausted, and have nothing left for his family. He made a decision early that he was never going to live that way. The neighborhood had its own gravitational pull. Stan ran with gangs. He stole cars. He got into the kind of trouble that, in that place and time, had a way of ending careers before they started, or ending something much more permanent. He was smart enough to know which direction he was heading if he stayed. So he left. He had almost no money. He drove from city to city with no plan, sleeping where he could, living out of whatever he had in the back of his car. He later described that period as being completely lost. No direction, no destination, no idea what kind of life he actually wanted. He just knew the one he was heading toward wasn't it. The turning point came in a small village called Manson Creek in British Columbia, Canada. A native family took him in. They lived off the land, hunting, trapping, fishing, with a simplicity and self-sufficiency that Stan had never seen before. Something clicked. He said it plainly. This is what I want to do. This is the life I want to live. But he was in Canada on no legal standing. He couldn't stay. So he moved north again, crossed into Alaska, and found a version of that same life on the edge of the Alaskan interior. His first winter nearly killed him. Stan and his then-wife ran out of food. To survive, they ate 2/3 of their own sled dog team, a detail that, years later, would become one of the most discussed moments from his time on television. But he made it through, and he never left. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Tanana, Alaska sits at the junction of the Tanana and Yukon rivers, deep in the Alaskan interior, about 60 miles from the Arctic Circle. When Stan arrived there, the village had a population of roughly 200 people. Around 80% of them were Native American, members of the Athabascan people, who had lived along those rivers for thousands of years. There were no roads in or out. In winter, the only way to reach the outside world was by bush plane or over the frozen river. Wolves moved through town in the dark. The cold was the kind that turns metal brittle and can kill an exposed person in hours. Stan built a cabin, learned the rhythms of the place, raised his son Joey, married his second wife Kathleen, whom he met in Alaska, and spent more than 40 years becoming a fixture of that community. He was not a native Alaskan. He was a Boston kid who had reinvented himself so completely that the village of Tanana became the only version of home he recognized. The show found him through a chain of introductions. Paper Route Productions was scouting for a hunter and trapper in Alaska, and Discovery Channel wanted to build a series around subsistence living. Stan's friend in Fairbanks, a big game guide, pointed the producers in his direction. Stan sent photographs of what daily life looked like in Tanana. The images were enough. Discovery was in. Stan agreed to participate for a reason that had nothing to do with fame. He wanted to correct a misunderstanding. The outside world saw subsistence hunters and trappers as cruel, as anachronistic, as people doing things that no longer had a place in modern life. Stan wanted to show a different version of that story, that a life built on hunting, trapping, and the land could be meaningful, ethical, and hard in ways that most Americans would never fully understand. Yukon Men premiered on August 24, 2012. The reviews were mostly positive. Critics called it authentic. Fans called it one of the best survival-based reality shows on television. One early critic wrote that it didn't need the dramatic foreshadowing the network kept inserting because the scenes of hunting, setting traps, and maintaining equipment were already compelling enough on their own. That note about the dramatic foreshadowing, it turned out to be a warning about where the show was heading. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. The reason Yukon Men connected with an audience in its early seasons was the same reason any reality show with staying power connects. The people were real, and the stakes were real. Stan Zuray became the anchor of the show not because of manufactured conflict, but because his backstory was genuinely remarkable. A Boston gang kid who walked away from everything and rebuilt himself in one of the most inhospitable environments in North America. Charlie Wright, a native Alaskan elder with deep knowledge of the land and the river, brought cultural depth that most reality television never attempts. Joey Zuray, Stan's son, brought youth and energy. The Moore family and James Roberts filled out a portrait of a community where people depended on each other in ways that most American television never gets close to. The early seasons were built around actual subsistence life, hunting moose and beaver for food, setting trap lines across frozen ground in the dark, repairing snow machines with improvised parts because the nearest supplier was hours away by air, watching the ice break up on the Yukon River, and knowing that the timing of that event determined whether the fish wheel went in on schedule, and whether there was enough protein stored before winter locked everything down again. Viewers who had never set foot in Alaska found themselves emotionally invested, not because of manufactured drama, but because the consequences were genuine. If a supply run failed, people went without. If the hunting season was lean, the whole community felt it. Discovery Channel, like most cable networks running a hit, eventually started pushing for more. More conflict, more tension, more edge. The tactics that followed were the same ones that have killed reality shows for 2 decades. Staged confrontations, dramatic reenactments of things that had already happened, and the introduction of new cast members designed to create friction, rather than reflect the actual community. Longtime viewers began noticing the shift around Season 5 and Season 6. Fan comments from that period describe watching staged accidents and scripted tension play out alongside the genuine survival content that had made the show worth watching. The authenticity that had been the show's defining quality started to feel diluted. Viewers who had tuned in specifically because Yukon Men felt different from other reality television began tuning out. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. There is one factor in this story that almost no retrospective about Yukon Men has covered properly. In August 2016, while Season 7 was still in production, the state of Alaska opened the road to Tanana. For the entire run of the show, Tanana's isolation was not just a backdrop, it was the premise. A village with no road access, no way in or out except by air or frozen river, where 200 people had to generate enough food, fuel, and supplies to survive months of darkness and temperatures that routinely dropped well below zero. The isolation was the engine of everything the show was built around. The road changed that. A 20-mile gravel extension connecting Tanana to Manly Hot Springs, costing $13.7 million and years in construction, opened just weeks before the final season began airing. Suddenly, the village that had been presented as one of the most remote communities in the continental interior had, for the first time in living memory, a physical connection to the outside world. The show's entire narrative logic, that these people had no choice but to live this way, that subsistence survival was not a lifestyle option but an absolute necessity, was at least partially undercut by that road. Viewers paying close attention noticed. Stan Zuray himself did not frame the road as a negative. He welcomed it. He had practical concerns about the community and understood that reduced freight costs and better emergency access were real benefits for real people. But the dramatic architecture of the show, the relentless isolation, the us against the wilderness framing, no longer sat on quite the same foundation. Discovery aired Season 7. No Season 8 was commissioned, no official reason was given. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me because this next part is why the whole story matters. The cancellation of Yukon Men removed a camera from Tanana. The problems Tanana faced did not go with it. Yukon River king salmon, Chinook salmon, had been in documented decline for years while the show was airing. But the collapse that followed the show's end was of a different order entirely. By 2021 and 2022, Chinook salmon returns to the Yukon had dropped so catastrophically that the Alaska Department of Fish and Game closed the fishery entirely. Chum salmon returns were the lowest on record. By 2024, a 7-year moratorium on all Chinook fishing on the Yukon River, covering subsistence, commercial, sport, and personal use fishing, was signed between Alaska and Canada, running through 2030. In 2023, Stan Zuray announced that his family had dismantled their long-running fish wheel. A fish wheel on the Yukon River is not a piece of sporting equipment. It is an infrastructure essential, a rotating structure that scoops fish from the current and deposits them in a holding basket. Fish wheels on that river had been feeding Tanana families for generations. Stan's fish wheel was gone because there were no longer enough fish to justify keeping it in the water. The Tanana Chiefs Conference, the tribal consortium that serves the interior Alaskan villages including Tanana, describes the salmon collapse as the most severe environmental crisis in the region's recorded history. They note that subsistence communities along the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers have carried the conservation burden of this collapse, while commercial and sport fisheries upstream and offshore were slower to cut back. The fish that fed 200 people through winter, that powered the sled dog operations the show made famous, that were central to the Athabascan culture Charlie Wright spent decades trying to preserve, those fish are functionally gone from the river right now. The show spent 7 seasons documenting a way of life. It never got to film what is happening to it. One phone call, one conversation, that's all it took to change the direction of everything. After the cameras left, the people of Tanana kept going. Stan Zuray stayed. He is now in his mid-70s and still in Tanana, still running trap lines when the season allows, still maintaining equipment for the village, still showing up for the community the way he has for more than 4 decades. He took on a temporary role operating Tanana's mechanical and equipment shop when the village needed someone. He plows snow, he checks traps, he does the things he has always done, with or without a camera crew watching. In February 2023, Governor Mike Dunleavy appointed Stan to the Alaska Board of Fisheries, a real government body with real authority over how Alaska's fisheries are managed. A Boston kid who once survived by eating his sled dogs was now sitting on a state board weighing policy decisions that affect the Yukon River. His term ran through 2025, and the appointment was confirmed by the Alaska legislature. The documentary that Stan and a husband and wife filmmaking team had been working on for years, The Stan Project, was completed and released in 2024. It debuted at the East Lansing Film Festival and is available online. The filmmakers had first met Stan while working on Yukon Men in 2012. Ryan, the director and cinematographer, spent years developing the project after becoming convinced that the show had never fully captured who Stan actually was. The documentary goes back to Boston, traces the arc of his life, and frames it as a story about what it costs and what it means to build a life that is genuinely your own. Stan also published a memoir, Carry On. Stan Zuray's journey from Boston greaser to Alaskan homesteader is available in print and audiobook. It covers decades of experience that 7 seasons of television only touched. Joey Zuray and his wife Samantha, who is Charlie Wright's daughter, moved into winter trapping after the show ended. They sold wolf and marten pelts to fur markets in Canada, China, and Russia. Joey races in the Yukon 800, one of the longest and most demanding riverboat races in Alaska. In 2024, he upgraded his race boat and began early community fundraising for the season. Charlie Wright, now an elder statesman of the village, was re-elected as secretary and treasurer of the Tanana Chiefs Conference Executive Board of Directors in March 2024, with a term running through 2027. He also serves as a commissioner on the Yukon River Intertribal Fish Commission, where he has been a vocal advocate for the protection of salmon runs that feed not just Tanana, but dozens of villages across the interior. These are not people waiting for a television comeback. They are doing the work. The question in the title of this video has a layered answer, and it is worth being specific about each layer. Discovery Channel canceled Yukon Men because the ratings fell. That is the commercial reality, and it is not in dispute. The ratings fell because the production choices in the later seasons introduced stage drama and dramatic reenactments that eroded the authenticity the show's audience had specifically come to it for. When a show built entirely on the premise of genuine, unscripted subsistence survival starts relying on the same tools as a scripted drama, it loses the thing that made it worth watching. Discovery had seen this pattern before. So had the audience. Those production choices were made against a backdrop of real external pressure. The Canadian government's objections never fully went away. Animal rights campaigns ran for years. And then the road to Tanana opened in the final months of production, quietly removing one of the show's fundamental dramatic arguments. But underneath all of that, there is something the show never fully addressed, a tension that ran through every season without ever being named directly. The show presented subsistence life in Tanana as timeless, as if these people were living exactly as their predecessors had lived, locked in a permanent struggle with an unchanging wilderness. That was never entirely true. And by the time the show ended, the evidence of how much was changing, the salmon, the road, the warming river, the dismantled fish wheels, was impossible to ignore. Stan Zuray agreed to do the show to correct a misconception. He wanted the world to see subsistence hunting and trapping as ethical and meaningful, not as cruelty or anachronism. He largely succeeded. Millions of viewers came away from Yukon Men with a genuine understanding of and respect for a way of life they had never considered. What he could not control was what happened to that way of life after the cameras left. The Yukon River King Salmon Run closed to all fishing through 2030. The fish wheel gone, the village now connected to the outside world by a gravel road. The future of the community Charlie Wright gave his life to, uncertain in ways that make a canceled television contract look small. Yukon Men ended because a network walked away. The story it was trying to tell is still unfinished. 7 seasons of television documented one of the most genuinely remote and self-sufficient communities in modern America. When Discovery Channel pulled the plug, most of the coverage focused on ratings and renewal cycles. What it missed was that the real drama, the salmon collapse, the road, the dismantled fish wheels, the 2030 fishing moratorium, Stan's appointment to the state board, was only beginning as the show ended. The people of Tanana are still there, still navigating a world that is changing faster than any reality television format could capture. Stan Zuray went from a Boston kid living out of dumpsters to an Alaskan elder sitting on a state fisheries board. His documentary is out. His memoir is out. He is still in Tanana, still doing the work, still exactly who the show said he was. The question worth asking now is this. Yukon Men was canceled because Discovery walked away from it. But do you think the show did right by the people it documented, or did it leave the most important parts of their story untold?